readouts.
Fire monitors on. Graph 5. Engage. Change brainwave parameters.
Brainwave pattern altered.
Visual effects experts have been creating dazzling images since the early days of film. Today's effects artists have refined methods used for nearly a century and have taken the art of visual effects to new heights. The early film pioneers are credited with inventing the techniques that Hollywood's greatest visual effects experts still use today. Miniatures have played an important role in cinematic special effects. For the 1936 film Things to Come, a futuristic miniature city was constructed in intricate detail. In order to add actors to the scene, cameraman Eugene Shufton placed a mirror at a 45-degree angle in front of the lens. This made it look as if the actors situated off-screen were actually inhabiting the miniature city. This technique came to be known as the Shufton shot and is still a staple of modern-day special effects. Here's visual effects artist Harrison Ellenshaw to explain.
Somebody once said it's all done with mirrors, and I think they were right. Anyway, we have a mirror, and this, ironically, is used. We're just setting up a shot that is a Shufton process by which you reflect something into the scene. And what you do is you can scrape off the surface of a mirror so you can reflect only part of something off to the side into the scene. The wonderful thing about film is that it's really a two-dimensional medium. It's just like closing one eye, and you don't know if something's close or far because you don't have the depth perception. And film doesn't have the depth perception, and the third dimension in film is always an illusion created by all the cues that you have going for you. You know small things are usually further away, and you know things further away have less contrast and all those kind of things. But you look at a piece of film and there's no depth to it. It's just a piece of celluloid.
French film pioneer and former magician Georges Méliès is the father of special effects in the movies. For his 1902 film A Trip to the Moon, Méliès wanted to show a rocket ship landing on the moon. In order to achieve this effect, Méliès stopped the camera, placed a model rocket on the moon, and started the camera again. This simple technique is an early example of how editing can be used to create a special effect. Many of the techniques that Méliès pioneered have become standard contemporary special effects. This scene from Terminator 2 features a real tanker truck that has been intercut with a quarter-scale miniature truck. Modern advances in miniature design and editing make it difficult to tell which is the real tanker and which is the model.
Don't stop!
To find out more about this scene, we talked to Gene Warren Jr., who won an Academy Award for his special effects work on Terminator 2.
When the tanker swerves and starts to roll over, a medium shot of Arnold starting to flip is a puppet. The wide shot, when it starts to flip with intercuts, is an actual full-scale tanker that was rolled that is also a puppet, but that's Stan Winston's full-scale puppet. Then you cut back to another wide shot when it completes its fall and hits, and the puppet is flying over in the air. That, again, is a puppet. Then there are a couple of full-scale shots where the principal photography crew took the full-scale tanker, laid it on its side, put it on dollies, and pulled it with cables from trucks. Side angle sliding into the doorway was miniature with a puppet of Arnold. And the shot of the truck where Arnold leaps off towards camera, hits the ground and rolls, was the puppet that was go motion. I think the puppet was in maybe 5 or 6 cuts, and we had about 13 or 14 shots in the whole sequence that were miniature.
For Gene Warren Jr., special effects is a family tradition. His father, Gene Warren Sr., won an Academy Award for his special effects work on the 1963 classic, The Time Machine. Gene's son, Chris, assisted his father on Terminator 2. Here's Chris Warren to tell us more about the miniature truck.
It's a quarter-scale model. We did quite a few shots with it. We rolled it over onto its side. It slid along the floor, hit the wall, broke in half, and then spilled out liquid nitrogen onto the floor. Well, at the time when we started the job, it took about 3 to 4 guys, two to 3 months to build it. Everything was built from scratch. Gene wanted us to make it sturdy because we knew that we would be taking this through a lot of abuse. We had to rig it to do that, which took about 35 different takes. It would flip over onto its side and it would slide. It slid all the way down the track. The truck itself was dragged by a motor on cables. As soon as it hit the wall, it snapped in half. All the mechanics of it was driven by hydraulics. Now, of course, all that was done in different pieces. So we would first do the flip over, do it several different times until we finally got that working. And then we would re-rig the truck again just for the sliding portion of it. And we would re-rig the truck again for when it broke in half. So each individual piece was a total different setup, you know, sometimes days before we could go on to our next shot.
A technique called perspective photography is often used to make miniatures appear larger on the big screen. Visual effects artist Brick Price is one of Hollywood's top miniature designers. His company, Wonderworks, has designed miniatures for films such as Star Trek, the motion picture, and The Abyss.
Well, we have a technique here that we call Wonder Vision, which is really 90s version of foreground miniature photography. And that is the old kid trick of holding your hand out and having your buddy look like he's standing in your hand and he's actually 20 feet away. What we do is the camera's basically a one-eyed idiot. It cannot perceive depth, so if we take away depth perception from the camera, then we can fool it in a lot of different ways. By placing a model in the near ground, we can give visual clues to the camera that makes it think that this model is further away than it actually is. So we could integrate the model into a live-action set piece. Typically, we'll take a building like a skyscraper or something and integrate it into a city line. And it's impossible to tell that that is a model in most cases because the lighting is interactive. You're using exactly the same lighting that you're using on the set. The film stock is the same. It's developed at the same time. There's no grain difference at all. There's no matte lines to deal with.
Many of today's top visual effects artists worked in conjunction with Lucas to create the special effects in Star Wars. Harrison Ellenshaw was a matte painter for the film.
The original concept for Star Wars was included the idea of an effects facility. Well, at the time, there were no real effects facilities as there are today. And so George Lucas felt that it was important that somehow he gathered together a team of people who could set up a place and provide the effects for a film called Star Wars. I was contacted at that time to see if I would do some matte paintings for Star Wars, and I said yes, I'd be very interested, knowing that this was the man who'd done American Graffiti, and I thought it'd be kind of fun. And they said it's going to be a B-movie, science fiction kind of thing. Well, at Disney at the time, I wasn't working on that type of thing, and I saw this as a little bit of, not necessarily a challenge, but something interesting to do. Well, when I first went out there, and I went out and I worked nights, I basically moonlighted at what was called then Industrial Light Magic, and it was in Van Nuys. And you would walk into this place, and it was very informal, to say the least. The screening room was a projector in the room. There were some couches that were, you know, taken from Goodwill or directly off the street. But, you know, as the old saying goes, somebody said, well, don't give up your day job if you go to work on this Star Wars, because who knows how that's going to do. And the success of Star Wars, many people at the time said, you know, that film was so great because of the effects. Wrong. It's a great story.
Dennis Muren has won 7 Oscars for his special effects work. Muren, like Ellenshaw, contributed to the special effects work in Star Wars.
Ever since I was a kid, I was always excited about putting these images together, these pieces together to make these scenes. Scenes that you can't see in real life. that are just too incredible or fantastic or far away. You can't get to them to see them. And I don't know what it is. It was just always something that this has driven me to want to do this work and put in, these long, ridiculous hours we do. Movies are part of a bigger thing. The work we do is a few minutes in a 2-hour movie. And it's important that that entire movie be viewed as one whole experience, that the audience doesn't get distracted. There's a danger in this business of the special effects dominating the story. And one of my jobs is to remind my colleagues all the time that what we're doing is we're making one small part of a big movie. For Star Wars, my son, who's 5 years old, is discovering them now for the first time. And I haven't seen them since they came out. So I've kept a distance on them. And now I'm going through the series and learning them one at a time, actually through a kid's eyes sitting right next to me. And as I was doing them, I couldn't, I was too close to it to tell. But seeing them now, there's just an incredible imagination work and an incredible transportation to another world. And this incredible feeling that you are on this ride whether you want to be or not.
Visual effects artist Richard Edlund won an Academy Award for his work on Star Wars. He also created a motion control system that gave movement to the miniature space vehicles. Here's Richard Edlund to explain.
Star Wars came along and I had the opportunity to build a full-fledged system up from scratch, basically, because when I started there was nothing but a card table and a telephone on it. So we had to acquire equipment to building pretty high-tech solid-state memory that enabled us to do motion control, which was the whole key to making the shots look like they did for Star Wars. Your edges are defined by the technology that you have available, and there are certain limitations that are there. And essentially, it's like an old Chinese adage from Confucius, where you take the disadvantage and you make it work for you. And that, I think, is like one of the axioms that we always use, is that if you have a disadvantage, there's got to be some way of turning it to your advantage.
It took the combined talents of visual effects artists to create the groundbreaking effects in Star Wars, making this film a milestone in the evolution of special effects. In today's Hollywood, it's become almost routine to shoot a film in various locations all over the globe. But in the early days of film, budgets dictated that everything had to be shot on the back lot. In order to create these locations, Hollywood calls on matte painters. Visual effects artist Harrison Ellenshaw's father, Peter Ellenshaw, pioneered the use of matte paintings. Today, Harrison Ellenshaw carries on the family tradition. Here's visual effects artist Harrison Ellenshaw to explain.
The beginning of matte painting occurred simultaneously in Europe and in the United States. A man by the name, I believe, of Hall was doing matte paintings, glass paintings, whereby he painted on a piece of glass, set it up in front of the camera. It was a castle on a hill, and you could see through the camera and see the painting sitting on the hill at the same time. At the same beginning of the century, a man by the name of Percy Day, who is my father's stepfather, so he's my grand stepfather, was doing the same thing in Europe. He went to France and did this many times. And he had great success with it. People were very happy with the illusion he could create.
Here's matte painter Justin Brandstetter.
Basically what's happening here is we have the live action rolling. We have people walking down a road, but the main reason why we're doing a matte painting for it is you can see there's really not much happening right here in the background.
It is the matte painter's job to add these elements to a scene and create a visual landscape that otherwise doesn't exist.
Basically what I'm doing right now is just laying in some clouds. It's going to be a pretty dramatic shot. But that's what's great about the painting, is that it really doesn't matter how it's shot. You can really, stage it how you like it. If you want whatever area you want to be different, it's just a matter of painting it in and pretty much do anything.
This is what the matte looks like after it has been composited into the scene. As you can see, matte paintings like this one can add scope and drama to a scene. Mattes also allow filmmakers to create scenes that are not possible to shoot using real locations. As we've seen, most visual effects work is the result of hundreds of hours of painstaking work by effects specialists. Although many of these techniques are still done by hand, much of today's effects are created with a computer.
Systems readouts.
Fire alarm is on.
Computer-generated special effects are used in the 1992 release The Lawnmower Man. This film explores a relatively new technology called virtual reality. We spoke to Mark Malmberg of Chaos Incorporated to find out how computers were used to create the special effects for the film.
My description of virtual reality is probably a little different than most people, but really what people understand as virtual reality with the helmet and the glove is a very natural evolution of media technology. And so in my mind, you can go back to a cave painting or whatever, and that's a representation of something that otherwise would not have been part of that reality. That painting enables you to enter somebody else's vision and to experience what someone else has experienced.
In order to create this alternate reality, specially designed computer software was used. This presented a unique challenge to Malmberg and the special effects crew at Chaos.
Each scene that we created for Lawnmower Man had very definite technical challenges. One example is the particulation scene, which a lot of people are curious about. And that was a scene which didn't necessarily use new and unknown technologies, but it was a case where the animator was able to use the technology that we had in a very creative way, used our 3D animation software to create a sort of particle system with texture mapped objects that whirled away. And that, from a technical standpoint, it's a use of existing technology to do something that wasn't existing.
To create this effect, the actors were first photographed in front of a blue screen. The actors' images were then digitized by computer and composited into the scene.
One of the scenes which I actually believe to be have been one of the more challenging scenes was the shots that Hayden Landis, one of our animators, worked on, which portray Job's point of view when he's receiving the treatments. One animator had to spend 6 months in front of a screen making these shots where he was flying down into this spiral vortex of sacred geometries and strange symbols.
This scene shows us Pierce Brosnan's point of view through the virtual reality apparatus. In order to create this effect, visual effects technicians first created computer-generated wireframe models of the various elements in the scene. The frames are then covered with computer-generated skins that provide a surface to the wireframes. The surfaces are then smoothed out and highlights are added. The results are a stunning example of computer-generated special effects.
A lot of the symbols and structures in those shots were actually have the intent of having a physiological effect on the viewer. In Lawnmower Man, we did make very definite attempts to have strong impact on the viewer through whatever was happening in each scene. In these scenes where Job was experiencing the treatments and the bombardment of icons and sacred geometries, we did everything we could to make that a real experience for the viewer. And the spiral, which is the foundation of those scenes, is a hypnotic, transcendental sort of form, and it induces a definite alteration of your state of mind. If you sit and look at a spiral turning, it's hypnotic. And so we did as much as we could in those scenes to really make them have a physiological impact on the viewer.
The Lawnmower Man, with its computer-generated images, represents the future of special effects in the movies. Visual effects artists can now use computer technology to create images never before seen in any film. Films like The Lawnmower Man have only scratched the surface of computer animation. As special effects enters a new era, computers will continue to be an exciting and powerful tool in the creation of new and innovative special effects. Hollywood has always embraced new technology. When audio recording became possible in the 1920s, the movies immediately began to talk. Hollywood was just as quick to seize upon the potential of the computer. Filmmakers always set out to dazzle the viewer, but today's audiences are more amazed than ever. Computer-generated images are Hollywood's newest and most powerful visual effects tool. It all began with Disney's ambitious 1982 film, Tron, the first movie to contain computer-generated images. Tron was ahead of its time and changed the face of visual effects forever. Disney's head of visual effects, Harrison Ellenshaw.
Tron was, from my mind from the very beginning, was a huge opportunity to do something on film that film is very capable of doing, and that is to create a whole new world. And you can go places on film. Film is unique as a medium. It's not like poetry, it's not like music. You can visually show something that people have never seen before.
The computer not only generated these images, but served as the environment for much of the film's action.
Man goes inside a computer, and it's not just wires and circuit boards, but he's inside, and there's another world that we create from scratch. And also, we were really taking advantage of the birth of computer-generated imagery, and it was extremely ambitious to expect to get 15 minutes of CGI. Tron was the beginning of all that promise. The promise on Tron was, in 5 years, this stuff will revolutionize effects work and filmmaking as we know it. Two things on Tron that were different and unique. One was the use of computers to do very labor-intensive work, to be able to do many different frames of film and to computer generate light cycles, tanks, and a world that looked like it was made by a computer, but we used that to our advantage. So you could take, in a computer, all a computer does is it crunches a lot of numbers. It doesn't create really anything. It just does a lot of calculations. But you're able to get footage that when programmed comes out the other end and the computer's done all the hard work. Now, that's 15 minutes of about an hour's worth of footage. The other 45, though, was done by hand, was very labor intensive. So the difference here became, how do you do 1,200 shots in a 6-month post-production schedule? A tremendous amount of it was done with cells. People were photographed in 70 millimeter, you put them onto cells and then had to rotoscope in areas where color was added. So you had 20, 30 exposures on a downshooter on an animation stand. We had 13 animation stands through the studio, throughout town. We had 750,000 cells that 80% of them went to Taiwan and came back in 3 months, all inked and painted. It was, on the one hand, a lot of fun. It was craziness. It was satisfying to finally see these images come together, to see 1,000 shots put together that were all effects. You got over an hour of wall-to-wall effects. The ironic thing was that we had 400 people working on that show. I mean, it was terribly labor-intensive.
Industrial Light and Magic began working with computer-generated images in 1988 with the movie Willow. This transformation sequence is actually the first instance of the morphing technique made famous by Terminator 2. ILM's 7-time Oscar winner, Dennis Muren.
Morphing has suddenly become the sort of buzzword, but what it is it's essentially when you take one two-dimensional image and another two-dimensional image. Two-dimensional meaning you've already photographed 2 pieces of film, and you can take an image off of one and apparently blend it into the other. It sort of changes its outline and its shape, and it sort of appears to metamorphose, where the word came from, into another shape. I try to bring them, my moments into the movie to be as heightened as they can be, to leap them a little bit farther into their imagination than they thought possible, so they can then get more and more sucked into the story and more believe what's happening.
Before the computer was ready to synthesize the images, models of the animals needed to be constructed in various stages of metamorphosis. ILM's Gene Bolte.
This transformation, they wanted to see quickly one animal literally growing or shrinking from another. Where what they would do in the computer department would be take our model of a goat, and then our next stage, which was a model of an ostrich, and in between even, we did half and halves, so that you had kind of like an animated stages of development. And they'd film those moving, so you didn't have just a static thing. You'd have it actually doing something, growing and shrinking a little bit. And then the computer department take 1 point from the goat, 1 point from the midway, and they link those together and pull the things apart or push them together, depending what they have to do. And that went various stages all the way through the transformation. So you didn't have anything harsh and happening too fast. You got a nice flow of movement from one to the other. And Doug Smythe was the computer artist who was very instrumental in working out that morph technique, which was the word they used for that thing where the animals and creatures are transforming and growing in 3 dimensions. And I've heard Doug say that he never thought he would use it again. It was a formula that he worked out and never realized how useful that was going to be in the future.
ILM's computer work continued in the 1989 film Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. For this scene, director Steven Spielberg insisted that the villain's destruction be seen without the use of cutaways. The entire disintegration had to take place in front of the camera. The solution?
There were about 4 or 5 different masks that were made of different areas of decay that were going on the guy's face. And they were all programmed by motor so they could go through the same sort of motion. So each one of these masks that shows different levels of decaying all could move through the same program. And then they were morphed. One was morphed into another, into another, into another. So it appeared in one shot that the entire thing fell apart. And in fact, you were seeing many, many models of different decays that were all morphed together.
Computer-generated images have come a long way in a short time. By 1989, filmmakers had already developed the technology to create things that simply do not exist. An entire image could now be generated by computer software. This pseudopod from James Cameron's underwater adventure, The Abyss, was created by Steve Williams and the computer experts at ILM. Steve Williams.
On The Abyss, my job was a senior animator, and I had 18 scenes, 72 seconds. The job was to animate the pseudopod creature moving throughout these different scenes. So once again, we photographed everything, knew the exact size of the room, and animating cross-sections over a spine, essentially, that move within the environment, and then reflecting the environment, plus adding one additional pass to look at as though it was refracting, and then running a little program over the surface that rippled it in X, Y, Z in time.
This is the computer graphics mainframe at Industrial Light and Magic. It took a crew of 6 people 6 months to complete the 72 seconds of computer animation for The Abyss. Here's Steve Williams to demonstrate how computer animators created the pseudopod.
The device here is a 3-dimensional wireframe modeler that we use. It's sort of run with a mouse, and we can operate in a 3-dimensional environment with a front, right, top, and perspective view. We can use, these are wireframes that we're using. So you can manipulate the wireframe, and pushing and pulling points on the surface is always changing the surface of the object. This is how we end up doing it. So we can actually, as opposed to doing this interactively, we can actually animate this over time. We can display 16.7 million colors simultaneously. Lights are also interactive. So as I move this light around, it's affecting the surface of the object. Also, animating surfaces is like so. We'll say this is our first keyframe. Make an alteration to it like this. Call this our next keyframe. This is exactly the way the animation will end up looking. So that's how we do it in time. Okay, animating something like the pseudopod was using a spine like this. So the actual spine was animated first, and then it animates automatically, filling in the actual in-between key position, like that.
Through the use of laser scanning, the computer artists at ILM then gave the pseudopod a personal touch.
Because of digital technology, we're capable of taking frames of a film and scanning them in. So you can imagine we can manipulate them in any way. Having that capability, plus the capability of using a device called a cyberware scanner, we can scan in images or inanimate objects like hands or cups or a face in this case, and it fires a laser at the face and extracts the data. We take that data and we, in this case, put it on the end of the pseudopod. In order to get it to animate and talk, we would scan in separate keyframes and then in between them as we wished over time. So that's how we got the actual smiling and the tongue sticking out.
It's trying to communicate.
In another shot, you noticed where the pseudopod was going through a door, and then the door shut, and then all of a sudden the pseudopod went down, and then it somehow miraculously turned into real water. At the time that we shot that, there was actual water coming down throughout the entire scene, but we painted out halfway up. So all you see is the pseudopod there. It starts to drop, and then the water forms.
Computer technology allows filmmakers to create anything that they can imagine. Animators at ILM had the monumental task of generating more than 40 different shots of computer images. A crew of 50 visual effects artists worked for the better part of a year to complete the film. For the artists at Industrial Light and Magic, all those hours at the computer terminal had paid off. Here's Dennis Murin.
The entire T2 project was the most challenging project I've ever worked on. There were so many things that had to come together on that show for it to work. One is, we had to figure out how we could just digitize film so we could do all the digital work we needed to do in the middle, all the software, generation of images and all, and then get it back on film. That was a major hurdle. Previously, we'd done 4 shots in Back to the Future 2, and we'd done a couple shots in The Abyss. But to think we could do 45 shots with a deadline was a big deal. So it took a lot of figuring out of stuff, and I actually took a year off work to kind of fortitude, actually kind of see if this was an avenue that I felt I wanted to pursue, this digital technology, or whether we should, put it on the back burner for 5 years and let other people figure it out.
This scene required a complex combination of live-action footage and computer-generated images. ILM Steve Williams.
One of the biggest problems in Terminator was to try and give an illusion of plasticity, so pieces of geometry were falling off them, yet it was totally smooth and not showing any hard-cut lines. And computer graphics, if treated wrong, will show very, very hard edges. And on film, it just looks like a scrape on a car. So we did a lot, what we call a technique called ray sampling, where we take a patch of geometry and fire it against the 2 areas that are broken, and it creates a nice smooth fillet in between them. There was a problem of taking somebody and passing his head through bars, right? In that one shot where Robert walks through the bars. I even heard one guy sitting behind me go, I know they did that shot, they did it using jelly. In fact, it wasn't. It was supposed to create the illusion of that. So, element 1, Robert walking in that scene. We extract the data of the camera, so we know exactly the camera angle. Element 2, a set of bars, computer-generated, sitting there, okay? So we make computer-generated bars. The third element, we take our synthetic digital stunt double of Robert, and we rotoscope him to the first element of Robert walking. Then we pass the digital one of Robert through the bars. In using this technique called collision detection, it creates a nice little disturbance around the bars and looks like putty passing through, or a fork passing through putty. Then we take frame for frame of the first element of Robert and project it against the result, and it creates the illusion of the putty occurring. On Terminator 2, my job was up front to actually build a computer-generated man, Robert Patrick. So we had Robert come up here, we painted a grid on him, and we shot him on the back lot, and I used that information, that actual film, to study his motion and actually construct a man. We took a set of his actual images and put bones on his images and animated the bones walking, then built skin over top of that, so that was the second stage. So we were studying his motion, and in order to have Robert's body animate, we had 30 channels, approximately. Different channels that control, like the leg moving and the foot moving and the hands moving. And I guess the litmus test was sort of the part where he's walking into the fire, which kind of tested his invincibility.
Probably the most exciting combination of stunt work and computer imagery can be found in this sequence.
Get out.
In T2, there's a scene when Robert Patrick, playing the T-1000 robot, races out of a building on a motorcycle and jumps under the helicopter and smashes his head through the glass of the helicopter, the bubble on it, and then melts through the smaller hole that he's made as the polyalloy liquid, and then goes into the seat and reconstructs himself into the shape of the policeman again. And those were done through a series of things, one of which we shot Robert for one of the shots, sticking his head actually through the glass, and then we stretched the image. We pulled the image and stretched it into a blob shape and mapped out in the computer over a three-dimensional shape of a blob pushing through, and then blended the two together so it appeared as though his face was stretching, and then it turned into the chrome and moved on through. And the following couple of shots we did has got a typical computer graphic sort of animation of a shape going down as a blob into a seat and then forming up into a person again. And then the way we did the entire show is, then that shape is then we call mapped with reflections that were actually in the helicopter that we shot when we were shooting the show. Just still photograph views of all the different areas, looking forward, back, top, bottom, right, and left. Those reflections then are just taken with a still camera, which are scanned into the computer also, and what we call mapped onto this geometry that we've made. This is what makes these characters look like the chrome, as opposed to a typical computer graphic logo of a certain Friday night movie or something like that you might see. Instead of it looking like plastic or like wood that a lot of computer graphics does, we've mapped on the reflections so this thing looks like it's a chrome shape.
Get out.
Special effects have clearly come a long way since a trip to the moon. One can only imagine what today's visual effects artists will conjure up next. It's a wrap.